here's Brody Brazil.
So this is a topic and a headline that came out right before the start of a holiday weekend. And because of that, I feel like it largely got buried. Not a lot of people talking about this yet, but I truly think they will be through the course of this baseball offseason and into 2025 for the San Francisco Giants. And my question here on the headline slide says, will the Giants spend less in 2025 with a question mark? But I feel like with the reporting that we're about to dive into and all things considered, that's not really a question. That's almost a certainty. But the real question is, how will it impact the team and what will the fan base think of this maneuvering? Let's get to Andrew Baggerly's work in The Athletic. Bag says this, quote, the Giants' first offseason under Buster Posey is expected to be marked by austerity measures, according to a league source familiar with the team's plans. By the way, look up the definition of the word austerity if you don't know. It is the perfect way to describe this situation. The Giants' adjusted payroll, which accounts for salary that is earned in a given year but is not necessarily paid out, is expected to step back from the $206 million they spent last season when they finished 80-82, while exceeding the luxury tax threshold for the first time since 2018. That's right. In baseball, there is kind of a luxury cap, but it's taxed. It's not a hard cap. You can exceed it. But there are some penalties because of it. The Giants are about to start facing some of those penalties and would face even more if they continue to exceed the luxury tax. And we'll get into that in just a second. Even a modest amount of belt tightening, like cutting down the salary, would still leave the Giants with limited resources to spend this offseason. Perhaps $30 to $40 million beyond their 8 players, which accounts for $109.5 million, under contract right now, plus the forecasted salaries of 4 arbitration-eligible players, plus pre-arbitration player salaries. A lot of moving pieces, and this rarely ever comes down to a pinpoint, fine, like very granular number here, but you're kind of getting the big picture understanding that the Giants, if they repeat where they were going last year, they might even spend more than they did last year, and they're not ready to do that, and we'll get into that also in just a second. Although the Giants are not resolved at present to trade off their major league roster to create more financial flexibility, they're not necessarily in a spot where they have to shed. They plan to explore it with arbitration-eligible players like LaMonte Wade Jr., $4.5 to $5 million, or $4 to $5 million, Camilo Doval at $3 million, and Mike Yastrzemski at $9 to $10 million through arbitration, among the names in play to be moved. So that's a list of regular players right there who may have to be shed just for the financials to get right for the Giants so that they can explore some free agent options. Some other topics mentioned by Bags in this article is that the luxury tax, as before, not only means that they had to pay a couple $1 million of penalty from last year, that's not a big deal, but now, this year, there are restrictions on free agent signings and draft picks and international pool money usage, and also the future taxes go up if, in fact, the Giants continue to exceed that luxury tax threshold. So they're mindful of the luxury tax. I think that's part of it. But maybe it's just a business decision. And we'll get into their operating revenue from 2 years ago. We don't really have it from last year estimated yet, but we'll get into the business side of this also momentarily. Giants chairman Greg Johnson says that there is no set player budget. And as much as everybody's talking about how much will and won't this team spend, honestly, the biggest factor of this video, and I think what fans care about most, it's not are they going to spend or not, it's are they going to win or not. Now, spending and winning may be related to a certain degree. Again, hang tight for that in just a second. But Greg Johnson says there's no set player budget, just a wide range of numbers they start with, and then there's some flexibility to go either way, depending on how they're feeling about things. And the Giants are coming off a last year where they took legitimate shots and landed a Blake Snell and a Chapman and a Jorge Soler, etc. They spent last year, to the point before, more than they had in about 5 to 6 years. Home attendance last year was up about 2.2 thousand fans per game for the 2024 baseball season. But we also found out through Andrew Baggerly's reporting that some of the increase in tickets had to do with benefits, bonuses, giveaways. They weren't necessarily tickets sold. They were tickets as part of packages. And so the Giants were getting more people to the stadium, but not necessarily getting more maybe income from the attendance revenue. So let me now switch gears. Thank you, Bags, for that reporting, that insight. And again, I think where that's coming from. The reporting, like you just saw, and the way it came out and when it came out. Buster Posey and Zach Manassian were down at the general managers meetings in San Antonio. So how it came out, where it came out, from who it came out, I think all of that is legitimate. And again, it's not really a question. That's more of a statement that the Giants in some way, shape, or form are going to spend less. So here are now my first thoughts on this. The Giants last year were 10th in Major League Baseball payroll spending for 2024. Quite honestly, that's probably in the range of where they should be. Top half of the teams, probably top third of the teams. I know some people will say you could spend like a top 5 team because your valuation among Major League Baseball teams is top 5. Now, I'm not here to say that these two things go together. Valuation is kind of like telling somebody, well, what their house is worth. But that's great. If you're not going to sell your house or a share of it, it doesn't necessarily matter because you can't get that liquid asset out of it all the time and then go put it into player payroll. I don't know that you want to always do that. But those two things right there, they don't necessarily, like they're on your screen at the same time, but they don't exactly line up in terms of direct meaning. But this is something the Giants are going to get maybe criticized for. Hey, you're worth a lot of money. This team is generating a lot of money. They're doing projects outside the ballpark. They're making money, but not turning around and spending it. Now, the operating income for the Giants, according to Forbes, from 2023 was $50 million. And so that's before 24. Let's subtract another $35 million, maybe more than they normally spend. And now that operating income, hypothetically, let's just say it's $5 or $10 million. And yeah, they're still making money. But when you start getting to that break-even point, I understand the cause for a little bit of concern here and just the direction you're trying to move. And again, winning and spending aren't always in direct correlation, and especially where the Giants are at right now. The Giants are also about to become the only MLB show in town, and that's more of a conversation point for fans, and I understand it. That's not something I see in all of this, but some people think that now the Giants maybe don't have to compete as hard. They don't have to spend as much. They don't have to put a product out there that's so enticing that people can't help themselves to go because now there's not a cheaper option over in Oakland to go watch Major League Baseball teams or games or opponents or stars or whatever. The Giants are in complete control of Major League Baseball in the Bay Area. I don't know if that's a motivation for them. I really don't. I understand that's an external viewpoint, but I don't know that it's necessarily going to factor into their trying to win and trying to get more business and more revenue. Those two things are out there, but I don't know how directly they're actually connected. I also think, with some deeper thoughts here, like I said before, spending doesn't guarantee you anything. And I know, coming off a World Series like we just saw between the Dodgers and Yankees, and even the Mets were in there in the NLCS, and I know the Guardians kind of bucked that trend, being one of the lesser spending American League teams to make it as far as they did. But we've seen this before so many times in baseball, guaranteeing you playoffs because you spent something, guaranteeing you anything because you spent a certain amount. It doesn't always work that way. I would also say that it's going to be very unfortunate and very difficult for Buster Posey in his start as president of baseball operations if he has to right away unload some salary and be worried about that and the restraints and the handcuffs that come with not only a salary cap and a luxury tax from baseball, but also an internal budget that he can't go after and chase. And we're going to talk Juan Soto in a second. I'm not even talking about the biggest stars of stars. I'm saying to build a proper team from the start and make a good impression in this new role for him. I'm also here to remind everybody that Major League Baseball's TV money might put a lot of teams in budget mode this season anyway. If the Giants are already saying this and they're not doing it because of a TV contract, there's a lot of other teams out there that are in the midst of figuring out what their new TV deal is. For example, the St. Louis Cardinals. They recently re-upped with the former Bally Sports Network, now FanDuel Television, FanDuel Midwest. And it was publicly announced that they'd be getting a lot less money in terms of revenue from their TV deal. So a lot of teams out there, probably about 10 in my estimation, are going to be looking at how they spend differently simply because of their television contract money with the regional situations they're in. So again, I'm just putting it out there. The Giants may not be the only ones who are thinking budget mode for this upcoming winter. And I would also like to say, as somebody who watched the Oakland A's very closely for a lot of years, they were a team that, well, unfortunately didn't pay to reward. They were also a team that didn't take risks. But you want to see a team rather paid to reward than pay to take risks. What do I mean by that? Wouldn't you love to have one of your own stars come up and prove themselves, and Elliot Ramos, and then after 3 or 4 years, you get close to the arbiters, you pay off that player a handsome salary, you keep that player because you know that player and you've watched them and you understand them, rather than try and hit the free agency market. My point is, I would rather have the Giants spend on their pipeline rather than entirely in free agency. It does seem like a common thread that all Giants fans want to do is acquire externally. They're not ready to draw from within. It's time to really figure out the within part and also pay attention to free agency. But again, I'd rather pay to reward than pay to just take risks. And I understand with some final thoughts here, the fan base is getting restless. They want to start seeing change. Being a 500 team last year, frustrating. I mean, couldn't get a couple games above 500, never dipped a handful of games below 500. Frustrating that they couldn't get the leverage they wanted over time. And it's been that way for a couple seasons, winning 100+ games, then firing your manager, having some losing seasons, the inconsistency and the inability for traction. I totally understand that. I also understand the spending pressures imposed by other teams. And again, what we just saw in the World Series, you really have to detach yourself from that. You're only working on the San Francisco Giants. Now, the division is tough, right? There's no question about that. But you can only control who the Giants field out there as a team, the moves the Giants make. That's really all you can do in this situation. And you also can't fixate on misses. I know, we'll go back to Shohei. I know, we'll go back to Aaron Judge and others. And I'm already going to put Juan Soto in this conversation. If you're telling me that they're in this budget situation right now, you could cross the name off the list. But you cannot fixate on those misses. You are here to build a team. You have some good pieces. You have a good start. Go in the right directions and don't worry about trying to land the biggest fish. And I feel like closing it out, it goes like this, moving on forward. Buster Posey should be your team's ambassador. He's the president of baseball operations. Let him go out and work with the free agents. Let him have those conversations with a Juan Soto and others of that ilk. If you can land them, great. Zach Manassian as a facilitator, he's got the background in scouting. Let him work on that pipeline. I don't want to say problem, but let him work on that pipeline emphasis internally. Let him sort out the players, figure out when to call up the players, who's right, who needs more time, what moves need to be made. Let that be his specialty. And then let Bob Melvin be a magnet inside the dugout. Let him be somebody that external players and internal players want to play for. Have some consistency in that dugout. Have a baseball team that is managed by human beings and not so much spreadsheets. And those are my final thoughts on the Giants. So again, a pretty big story, something that a lot of people will be talking about. I mean, I'm telling you, this came out and it kind of got buried. But over the course of free agency and players starting to go here and there, and what are the Giants doing and what are the Giants not doing? Why are they shedding so much going into next season? All of this is going to be a big conversation. I understand it. I understand the urgency. I understand the emphasis. I understand the change of direction. And the spending would be unfortunate if it was very limited. I guess the final thought is this. You really don't care. I promise you, you really don't care how much the Giants spend in terms of a dollar amount. All you care about is, can they get the best team out of it? Can they get some wins out of it? Can they get to the playoffs with whatever team they built, however they built it? That's the end of this video. Really appreciate you for sticking around. Thumbs up down below. That greatly helps me in this video and this channel. And also, while you're down there, take one quick second. Make sure you're already subscribed to this channel. That way I can definitely see you back here next time.